Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Faerie Conclave. This is episode 106. I'm your host, Alec. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm super excited to be joined by an extra special guest today. It's Ian. How are you doing today, Ian?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to introduce you a little bit, at least from where I know you from. You are a huge member of the cEDH community in specific, and I know you have won a lot of cEDH tournaments. You do coaching for cEDH, which I'm definitely going to want to talk about in a little bit. And I also met you very briefly at MagicCon Chicago a couple times, and got good vibes. So I was happy that you wanted to come on and do an episode with me today.
Yeah, once again, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. I have my my foot in a lot of toe in a lot of waters. I don't know what the expression is. I wear a lot of hats. I have my own channel, ComedIan MTG. I'm a co-host of the Mind Sculptors podcast, which is also a cEDH podcast with my friend Callahan. And a lot of people actually don't know this part, but I do a lot of the background stuff for Scribe Babies. So I'm their set director. I help along with basically all the stuff behind the scenes.
Nice. Yeah, that is a lot of hats. I love that. And just to kind of kick things off with a question I'm just curious about, what is it about cEDH that you get enjoyment from? Like, why is it the format that you focus on the most?
You know, I was playing Magic for, I want to say 7 years before I really dove into cEDH. That timeline probably is correct. It was a healthy amount of my Magic playing career before I ever touched the format. And honestly, I was very much like a turbo casual player, right? I had very crazy, over-the-top casual decks that would not I would not win a ton, but it would just be very silly and fun, and it would be the most thematic themes of possible, right? That was one of my favorite decks of all time was this deck that would tutor out the arena, but I would describe it as a 2-color, 3-color, 5-color deck, just nonsense like that. So I was playing the craziest of silly decks, and then one day in the shop, I was just playing the Naban, the mono blue wizard that doubles ETBs, and I just had a couple pieces of interaction in there. I was just playing really tight, and there was a gentleman who came in and said hey, I have this Najeela deck. It's a little high powered. Do y'all mind if I play with you? Sure. It's fine. Not really too worried about it. It was a few cards off the cEDH deck, to be honest.
Yep.
But I was able to out-tempo them a couple times in the game and have good interaction. They were like, hey, you played really tight. Come play cEDH. And it's sure. And right away, one of the things popped out to me was it was no power level discrepancies, right? Everyone was on the same page. It was really comforting to have that sort of understanding about that part of Magic, right? Whereas ironically, I was coming from the other lane that most people come to, which was I was playing the sillier stuff, and then I would get pub stomped by somebody who was basically playing a bad cEDH deck, right? So that was the reality I was kind of living in for a while, and so it was a nice relief to have everyone in this universal, we're all on the same page here to try and win and do crazy stuff. And to me, it also had the thing I was always searching for in my Magic career, which is you have this defined metagame, but because of the social aspect of the format, you could basically brew to your heart's content, right? And it still is that way to this day, even now that it's becoming a more legitimate format day after day, right? There's dozens more tournaments. I mean, we used to have a tournament every quarter for cEDH, right? And now we have multiple per weekend on local stores and things like that. So very different reality we're living in. I mean, there's a Star City event coming up that's literally a cEDH main event. So it's
nice, yeah.
We're living in a different world than we were when I started playing, right? But even in all of that, even in all that development, it's still a metagame where I can bring a deck like the deck we're going to talk about today, which is, some people would look at it and roll their eyes when they first see it, but it still shows up and performs. And, I've actually had some of my best tournament reports from this deck. So it's a fascinating format. There's so much diversity. Innovation is so highly rewarded. And that's one thing I love about it. And also you get to be social. You do that commander aspect that we all know and love, and be that person who engages in that part of the game. You can crack jokes, all that stuff, and it's rewarded, if anything.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I think what you were saying about the power level discrepancies is one of the most attractive things to me about cEDH, because it's just nothing feels worse than when that happens. And And it doesn't matter which person you are, if you're the person accidentally playing something higher power or the person who's getting stomped accidentally, both feel bad. So yeah, that's the thing I kind of had an experience when I first learned about cEDH where my playgroup started out with precons playing Commander, and then slowly we had like the classic arms race where we were all just building stronger and stronger decks. And then at one point, one of my friends copied this was probably around like 2018-ish. It was like a Selvala cEDH deck list.
Yeah.
And just brought that to regular Commander night, and of course won very quickly. And then the rest of us were like, why don't we just try cEDH for a while, since that's kind of the direction we're heading. So I played like a Godot deck that I proxied, and it was fun. I loved it. I think having a little bit of cEDH is a good experience for any Commander player to have.
Right.
And for me, it helped me kind of figure out how, like, what power looks like in your decks in Commander. And so I was able to find a better spot with that after experiencing like what's the most powerful thing we can do right here, and it's and I had a lot of fun. So I'm excited to talk about what cEDH looks like today, because like you were saying, it is very different from back then. I think
nice too to like in the Commander space, like kind of what you're saying. I think a lot of folks would like have a really good time as like having a cEDH deck as their palate cleanser. If like you've been stuck in a 3.5 hour casual game, the feelings are kind of bad, and it's just nice to have like all right, let's play some high power stuff, get it out of our system, and that way you don't feel tempted to like put the mana crypts in your casual decks and stuff like that, right? Like if you have a deck that's where all that stuff goes into, it's like it's nice to have that avenue for it,
Totally. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And I think just having that is great too when you run into people who are like, hey, anyone want to play cEDH? You're like, yeah, I've got one deck that I'm happy to pull out, and at the very least. And I think that, and it's just good experience. Like for me, I learned a lot more about ways I can improve just the way I playing normal Commander from playing a little bit of cEDH. So
yeah. And I used to like watch cEDH channels way before I was a cEDH player, just because I'd be like, oh, what are they messing around with? Do they have anything cool that I can use for my casual decks in there? Cool.
Yeah. Which there often is, I think. And it's cool to see, even though it's a very competitive format, the metagame is so diverse. I see different kinds of decks playing all over the place, and that's something that it depends on the time, but it's like it seems pretty unique to cEDH compared to other like competitive formats. So I do really appreciate that. Okay, I'm really excited to get into talking about one specific deck. Really quick, before we do, I always shout out one of my patrons at the Conclave Mentor patron level. So thank you, HB, for being a patron. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's get into the interview for this deck with my first question for you, Ian, which is, what is the commander of this deck, and what inspired you to build it in the first place?
Yeah, so the deck today I'm talking about is the deck name that I've affectionately called Super Mega Turbo Dinosaur Explosion 4000, which tells you about the chaotic energy I bring to playing this deck. It's Etali Primal Conqueror with the backside of Etali Primal Sickness. This commander is awesome. It's like a really cool Gruul commander. I don't really know what like first got me into it. I mean, I'm one of those people who, when a new set comes out, I basically go, okay, how many of these decks can I break and turn into a cEDH deck? I'll build each and every list in Moxfield. I won't sleeve up half of them, and they'll stay unused files in my in my library, basically. But this one like stuck out to me. I was like, you know what, this is a great, like, I've been taking a bunch of tournaments seriously for a little while. Like, might as well just like be silly, play a dinosaur, have a great time, right? And it turned out when I started playing it that it was actually pretty good. The first time I played it, I definitely had some things that I was not on the ball on, right? Like a couple things I was like missing as far as like what would it take to optimize the deck. And then ironically, I actually had one of the people from the Itali Discord reach out to me and said like, hey, like, love that you're out here publicly repping the deck. Can I help make some suggestions? Like, I'll even pay you for your time. Like, let's come like brew and workshop this deck together, right? So we did for some time. I made changes to their list. They made changes to my list. And then eventually I took it to another tournament because I was like, you know what? I'm kind of itching to play this again. And the changes were so good that now it's just become one of my favorite decks of all time.
Nice. That's really cool. I'm wondering, so you were talking about how when a new set comes out, You just like test out a lot of the commanders.
Yeah.
Is there anything like specifically that you look for in new cards or new commanders when a new set comes out that like Itali had that really caught your attention?
Yeah, so like a lot of the things with cEDH commanders is like, are they outlets for any sort of combo, right? So for example, Etali is an outlet for like infinitely recasting it with your like a dockside extortionist loop or a food chain. Like it had both of those combos sort of already baked into it. Ironically, those are like the worst parts of the deck, which is like it's a bad combo commander sometimes, but the best part of the deck is like 4 free cards as soon as you hit 7 mana, which you can do in cEDH on like turn 2.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
I also appreciate that you just like it because it's a big, cool dinosaur too.
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
that you mentioned that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's straight up, it's so different than when I like play a mid-range deck or a control deck. I'll come in, like doing my like, I'm going to interact with the table. We got to be responsible. I straight up adapt a different persona when I play this deck. I'm like, I don't know, guys, I'm playing the dinosaur. We'll see what happens, right? Like I become immediately like surfer vibes, like
Nice. Yeah.
Whatever happens kind of thing.
Yeah, which I love. I think like cEDH is the only place where you're going to get, the most focused gameplay, but the most chill people. Yeah, everyone I've ever played cEDH with has just been the chillest person in the world, and I really like that. Nice. Okay, so yeah, what about this deck's history?
Yeah.
Are there any just like notable changes, like things you tried maybe that didn't work out, or like new cards you've seen that have been really good?
So yeah, like it was a mid-range deck when I first built it, right? And that was more of like, yeah, you cast it turn 3, turn 4, and you get a couple things that will like make another Itali every once in a while, right? And that worked. And there was like, I had Crater Hoof in my first version of the deck just because I was like, I don't know, sometimes you hit it for free and you're playing like Gaia's Cradle anyways, like might as well play Crater Hoof, right? Just like get them, which was so funny because like it's such a casual all-star, but people don't expect it in a CDH game when you like hoof and then like duplicate the hoof and they're like, wait, what's happening?
Nice. Yeah.
So like that was version 1. And then version 2, the version that made me love it a lot more was just like, no, we put the cursed sticker goblin in there. We put like Hellkite Tyrant, I think is the name of the card, which is or Hellkite Courser, which is like this very obscure commander card that's like ETB, put your commander in from the command zone. It gets haste. You put it back in the command zone the end turn. But it's like in Itali, that's awesome. It's a free Itali cast, right? So a bunch of weird cards like that. There's Rionia, which was like the best card in the deck that I wasn't playing in the first version, and I'm like, oh, that card has single-handedly won me more games than any other card.
Wow, yeah.
Because you go to combat, you've cast like 1 or 2 spells, and you're like, cool, I have 4 Italis, like that's 16 free cards. Let's see what happens, And that's usually a game-winning recipe for a lot of folks. But there's definitely a lot of those cards that like sort of amped up the speed of the deck, helped a bunch. Actually in the first version I wasn't even playing the sticker goblin, even though I knew it was a thing. So I was like, there's no way I want to learn how stickers work in a competitive format. Right.
Yeah. So I'm curious about that. What is the sticker goblin? I'm unfamiliar.
Okay, so it is a 3 mana, so 2 and a red for a 2/2, and it's underscore goblin, right? It's where you put the sticker in, and then for each vowel on one of the names that you put on it, you make a red mana. So there's a way to optimize it so that you basically start your game with 10 stickers. This is a whole thing. I spent hours researching it to make sure I did this right. Basically, you start with 10 sticker sheets that you like. They're like your sideboard, basically, right? You bring them, randomize them. You get 3 of the 10. So most of the configurations mean that you're making a minimum of 5 mana off of it, right? The absolute worst case scenario you can get is a minimum of 4, and that's like the odds would be very much against you. And the best version of it is there's 1/6. So 90% of the time it's making 5. Which is great. It's a seething song that's a creature, so you can like bounce it and play it again, stuff like that, which is, there's combos and all sorts of nonsense there. And then best case scenario, it's making 6 mana for only 3 mana, which then, obviously gets you an Itali pretty quick.
Yeah, I kind of love this. It's very like, should it be that strong? I don't know. But I think that's hilarious that it's Sticker Goblin is a cEDH card here.
Yep.
Nice.
To everyone's chagrin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When you have a separate sideboard and like rule set just for your sticker sheets, it just I like that.
And it's one of those things where I was like, oh, it was a real barrier for me to want to learn it. But I was like, after I did, I was like, I'm glad that I did. I know how to do it now. It's a skill that I have in my arsenal, but man, it doesn't make me happy.
That's fair. Yeah, that's me too. When I have to remember what the initiative does, which comes up pretty frequently, and then it's like I should just learn it. Like I don't need to be salty about it. So, is there anything else you would like to talk about when it comes to just simply why do you like playing this deck? Like, what is it about this deck?
I mean, some of the coolest parts of the deck is like sort of the conversations around the deck, right? Because a lot of the times, it's like one of my favorite things in the world is to say, when I go to cast Itali, someone's like, oh, well, do you have an answer for this problem on the board state, right? Because sometimes you do play this dinosaur responsibly, right?
Yeah.
And so my favorite response is always to look at somebody and be like, well, what answers do you have in your deck? Because that's what I'll go dig for, And that's one of it's such a silly interaction, the idea that like, I mean, I'm also like, I've been a red player for the longest time. And the biggest thing that this deck did for me was, even though it's Gruul, it feels very mono red, right? You're playing Seething Songs and Pyretic Rituals and Treasonous Ogre and Sticker Goblin, like all these red cards, right? And to me, that was like, oh, thank goodness I can finally play what feels like very mono red energy in my favorite format, right? And so for a long time, I didn't really like gel with any of the mono red decks in CEDH, but this feels like that for me.
Nice. Yeah, that's one thing I feel like whenever I am trying out a new format, I come back to like my favorite deck in whichever format. And so, I'm a big fan of kind of forcing that to test the waters in a new place. So I love that you were able to find a deck that really feels red, which this one, it really does. Like it does all of the classic.
It's for sure red.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. I love that. So when you sit down to play this deck, what are you thinking about as far as your goals for like the first few turns of the game?
It's going to sound real silly, but the goal of the deck, and this might be one of the reasons I enjoy it so much, turn 2 Itali. Very nice. Few exceptions to the rule. You get Itali out turn 2. Maybe you have a second cast over, all the copy effects that are in the deck. We got Molten Duplication and Twin Flame and Heat Shimmer and Curse Mirror. Like there's so many ways to just like play Itali and then go for another Itali and then just keep chaining stuff. But that's generally the game plan. And then it's one of those things that really tests your skill as a pilot because you have to adapt, right? And cEDH is already a game where you have to adapt a ton because it's 100 card singleton times 4, right?
Yeah.
So in people's, even people's social mannerisms can change how you have to adapt to a game, right? Not to mention like the cards they're physically playing in their hands, right? So then having to also adapt to what cards you're flipping off the top, it's like nothing's guaranteed. You just go, right? And that's what this deck does. It definitely just goes. And I've done things like cast a Wheel of Fortune on turn 1 and that gets countered and I'm like, cool, I'll play without a hand for the rest of the game. That's fine. Like, it's got that energy with this deck. You're just like, you just got to go for it. And if it doesn't work, that's okay, man. I tried.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. And I think that this one's especially interesting because a lot of the value from Itali comes from whatever your opponents are playing. And that's just that's something that I see a lot in casual because it's like, oh, you get to play with each other's decks and that's fun. But this is I love seeing that here too, because it's like, how can I use your cards against you, which changes based on, who you're playing against and what they're playing. So. Yeah.
Ironically enough, the worse your opponent's decks are, the worse this deck is.
That's fair.
I actually had that come up where I was playing. It was like one of the Magicon single elimination tournaments, and like a lot of people were under the impression that it was like, it said you bring your best commander deck, right? So a bunch of cEDH players showed up, and a bunch of people who just had their best commander decks of casual commander showed up too, right? Yeah. And like one of the first gods I played in, there was one cEDH deck next to me, 2 people just doing their best.
Yep.
But Itali was awful because I kept hitting like the counter spells from this guy, which I can't cast from Itali, and then all of like the draft commons that they were playing in their casual deck. So I was like, uh-oh.
Yep. Yeah, and that's something that when you're playing just like regular old casual commander, it's like kind of funny when that happens, and it's like a charming moment. I've been playing against a lot of people playing the new Gonti precon that's all about stealing stuff from each other's libraries. And I'm like good luck with all of the bad cards that I put in my deck. I'll see what you can do with them. But
yeah, exactly.
I think, I was going to ask, how often does flipping Etali to the backside happen? Is that something you're kind of working towards, or are you mainly just trying to get those Etali ETB triggers?
So version 1 of the deck, the mid-range version, happened way more than one might think. That one was like the game would get grindy. You've already used your Crater Hoof. You only killed one person, and you're like, all right, it's Primal Sickness time. Let's go. Blightsteel at home, right? But then, I think as the deck got more aggressive, flipping it and making copies of the Blightsteel side doesn't really do anything for you, right? So a lot of the game plan nowadays is much more about like, let's just keep it on its front side. I'm happy. Like often when I make clones of Itali that are like the state-based actions will say you can only keep one, right? Because it's a legendary creature, and I'll throw her back in the command zone more often than anything else, right? Because I want to be able to physically just cast her again, right?
Yeah.
And get more into the battlefields, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely. As much as I love her Blightsteel Steel side. Since the new version is out, I think I've done it a single time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sure it's pretty desperate too when you're needing to do that. But it's also not the worst. Like the front side still being a 7/7 trampler, I'm sure is pretty relevant. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's I mean, the 7/7 trample on its own has put so much pressure on people. Like they're like, wait, how much is coming at me? You've done this 3 turns. Oh no, wait.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was thinking about is the difference between a 7/7 trample and then an 11/11 trample indestructible poison thing is probably not as big as it might seem. So that makes sense. Okay. So what would you say are some of this deck's weaknesses that you kind of have to be conscious of?
Well, there's definitely some very common stack species in cEDH that don't allow you to, like Drannith Magistrate, for example, everyone's favorite white card, says no casting from exile. So we definitely do, there's a number of those effects that do exist, and obviously playing against them is tough, but we do play a good amount of creature removal for stuff like that. The biggest problem, though, is the fact that cEDH is a very Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora heavy format. And you're playing a deck where, one cast of Itali on average is 4 to 5 spells. So you're like, you guys draw. I'm going for it, right? Which is, there's obviously a little more nuance to some of the intricacies of it, but there are many times where I've said like, I have one thing that can protect my entire stack, and I'm jamming in. We'll see what happens. And the deck's like resilient enough where you can kind of get away with it. But it definitely you gotta risk it for the biscuit.
Yeah, that makes sense because you're trying to steal, like you're stealing a bunch of cards all at once, but with Mystic Remora, or you're also giving your all of your opponents an almost equal amount of those cards to use against you. So interesting. Okay, I like that a lot. It's those are some of the decisions I think that I really find interesting with cEDH, where people are able to set those value pieces up so early, and then you kind of have to figure out how
to navigate them.
Exactly. How to navigate them where you can still come out on top, or if you just kind of send it and see what happens. I like it. Nice. Okay. So do you have any notable cards in this deck that fill like specific purposes that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I definitely mentioned a couple of them earlier, so jumped the gun on that one a little bit, but
no worries.
Rionia, as I mentioned, 99% of the time just wins the game, right? You get her down and she's making 1, 2, 3, 4 Italis, and 16 free cards is a game-winning recipe, turns out, a lot of the time. Earthcraft is a card I just added to the deck, and I am so happy with that one. It seems like a kind of a quirky little card, but it was like an old cEDH card that people haven't really talked about in forever, because like some people were like trying Squirrelcraft in their 4-color decks a long time ago, which is the combination of Squirrel's Nest and Earthcraft. But Earthcraft in this deck is really cool because it's a 2-color deck, so you're going to play some basics, right? Which does help against things like Path to Exile, Assassin's Trophy, all of those, etc. cards that will, put basics on your field. But it's also really nice when you're stealing other people's creatures and you have Earthcraft on the field. You have the ability to basically like, oh, here all these creatures come in, and because the way Earthcraft is templated, they don't need to not have summoning sickness because it's an ability of Earthcraft. So they're basically hastily tapping for mana as you're going through this process. You're like, cool, I'll take a bunch of your stuff, and also now that's more mana for me, and then I'll take some more of your stuff, and oh, hey, look, more mana for me. Thank you so much.
Nice.
Which is pretty cool. It's always funny to like tap a Itali to untap a forest.
Right.
Silly stuff like that. Some other stuff is like, as I mentioned, you do kind of have to jam into the Rhystic Study, Mystic Remoras of the world. So there's cards like Veil of Summer and Conqueror's Flail and stuff like that. Those are all there to kind of basically be like, please don't punish me for my actions. One of the featured cards for the deck for sure is definitely going to be Hunting Velociraptor, which, you ask anybody in the vacuum if that's a cEDH card. They probably won't say yes, but specifically very good in this deck because it's a 3 mana first strike, and it says dinosaur spells you have you cast at Prowl, right? So as soon as you connect with the Velociraptor, your Itali only costs 3 as opposed to the normal 7, which is a pretty healthy reduction. So a lot of the times that turn, you end up just like casting Itali, sacrificing her somehow, doing it again. Like it just gets very out of hand very quickly.
Nice. Yeah, that's a weird one. I think it's hilarious when these random like Universes Beyond cards end up just being perfect for like a deck as strong as this. I think that's so funny.
I think one of the other ones that might stick out to people is Rending Volley, which it seems like kind of a weirdly specific card. It's an instant, can't be countered, and it says deals 4 damage to a target white or blue creature. And you might think that is a little too niche, right? But specifically, all of the cards that I kind of went over that are like creatures that disrupt this deck are like Drannith, Lavinia, Boromir. Like I could go on for a decade about these creatures, but like they all happen to be blue or white. Turns out white plays a lot of stacks effects. Who could have guessed?
Yep.
But it being uncounterable, a nice 4 damage is like very healthy. So it just ends up kind of hitting everything that's a pain in the butt for you.
Nice. Yeah, and when I was looking at this card earlier, I was thinking that I would ask you if there are any cards in here that you've chosen for like your specific meta, or if you've kind of tried to build it to adapt to, wherever you decide to play it.
Yeah, so in general, I tend to not ironically, a lot of my time is taken up coaching people on cEDH, right? And then my weekends, I'm playing tournaments. So 90% of the time I'm playing cEDH is in a tournament, right? So I tend to build my decks accordingly, right? Not just for like a tournament in a specific region, but like to play in a vacuum tournament, which does have a lot of variance potential, right? Like you don't know the people who are going to be playing in Philadelphia versus the people you're going to be playing in Ohio the next week, right? So I do tend to try and target what I see in the metagame overall, right? And when you play enough tournaments, and now that information is becoming a little more universal, you can definitely target certain things, like with the Rending Volley, to be able to hate on the stuff that's going to be stopping you the most.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it is funny that whole list of cards you mentioned in the weakness section were all cards that Rending Volley deals with for 1 mana. So yeah. Makes sense. Nice. Okay. I think I probably could guess the answer to this, but if you had to pick just one like MVP card of the deck that is the most synergistic card in the deck, what would that be? Yeah,
it's got to be Rionia. I mean,
nice.
It's insane.
That
or like safe answer for cEDH. Dockside's pretty good in the Itali deck, but like, no, I mean realistically, Rionia is crazy. Like, just I've seen very few cards in this format that are like you put one creature with another creature and they just like cast 20 free mana worth of stuff, but this is one of those.
Totally. Yeah. So when you're able to do that with Rionia and you get you get 5 cards from each of your opponents or something like that, how do you deal with that, I guess, is my question. Like, how do you figure out, does it just depend on the situation? Like, how do you then take all those cards and try to put them together? Or do you just kind of cast everything and see what happens?
So, I mean, it definitely is like, it is a skill tester for sure, right? It's it is like the definition of non-deterministic storm, where it's like you're clearly doing something and you're clearly doing something that is winning you the game, but people are like, well, I don't understand. Like they could even, when you get the Rionia Itali thing going on, a lot of times they can be like, cool, I can counter every spell in the stack, and then there's still 4 of these we have to deal with. right? So a lot of the time is about finding that window, being patient. The card silence also hurts us pretty bad, right? So it's a pretty good one. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of those windows where you just kind of have to, as I mentioned, that keyword earlier, adapt, right? Pivot accordingly. There's definitely like at the end of the day, I want to have a protected way of getting to the combos that I kind of mentioned earlier, right? With you get food chain, squee, and your commander, that goes infinite. Or if you get the Temur Sabertooth dockside thing, there's also like a bunch of really weird corner cases where if you get dockside and this card and this card, or if you get the sticker goblin and this card plus earthcraft, and then like you start to like really stitch these wins together where you're like, well, if you have these 4 cards, that's actually a win condition, even though it doesn't look like one, right? And normally it doesn't like matter a lot for a deck like this, but because you're ripping through so many cards, it just comes up a ton,
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, the amount of just card draw that you get from this is absurd. So yeah, makes sense that you'll get to something eventually.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And all right, my next question I'm pretty excited for. Do you have any pet cards in this deck that might not be like the most optimal choice, but you play it anyway? Or is this one of those decks where you're always going for the most optimized choice?
To be honest, I am the command is that, right? Like it is
Totally.
It is exactly that, in the sense that like this entire strategy is it's raw, it's ripping energy, what I mean? You're sending for sure 100%. And I think that's just sort of an inherent part of this list. And, there are people who would definitely argue that is not like the most optimal thing you'd be doing in cEDH, right? But like, I do tend to be pretty specific with my card choices. A lot of the things that, to me at one point end up being like, I would consider them pet cards comparatively to other people, in the sense that like, I like them a lot more than other folks. I do eventually get a lot of people to sort of move over to me on those cards. So at
Nice.
one point, there might have been pet cards, but I do tend to convince a lot of folks on cards that I like, even if they seem weird at first. I'm definitely one of those people who I have not ever been afraid to go on EDH rec or look at casual decks or look at cards that some people would like scoff at. I mean, Winota was a deck that was my first big cEDH deck, and people literally like laughed when they saw me bring it to a pod, right? And then for a year, it dominated the format, right? So
yeah, I can't even think about laughing at a Winota deck at this point.
Right.
So yeah.
And so that's kind of the idea, right? Like I do tend to take a lot of these, the one thing I very much take pride in is I have more wins in this format than any other person with different strategies, right? I will take any sort of pile of cardboard and throw it together. So the pet decks is a lot more than the pet cards, I'd say. Nice. In the sense that I'm always willing to try something new and unique. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I really like that. I think that's one of the things that I like about Commander is just brewing new decks is such a big part of it for me.
Yeah.
And new cards come out and I'm brewing decks. Like that's just what I'm doing. And and that's one of the reasons why I've shied away from other formats, is just because, for standard you build a deck and you might pivot. But yeah, you're kind of locked in, right? Like you have that one deck or modern or something, you'll have that one deck forever and the metagame changes like a little bit. But yeah, I really like that you are able to and kind of push for to have new decks. Like you're just brewing new decks and trying them out without, feeling weird about not playing the same decks that have been in the format forever.
Yeah, and it's been a personal mission of mine basically since I've started this format to increase the amount of available archetypes and strategies, right? Like I've always been a brewer and I've always been pushing for that innovative space. I've revived like 3 or 4 decks that people were like, yeah, this was good in 2016, but it's dead now, right? And then I've top 16 a tournament with it, right? So like that's
nice.
It's been the challenge that I'm constantly putting myself under, is like, how do I break this next thing, right? Like I'm literally playing a tournament, 2 tournaments this weekend, and I'm trying to play 2 different decks for them.
First of all, that's incredibly impressive. And yeah, I cannot imagine the amount of brain power that you possess. But yeah, that's really cool. I think that's something that, it gets me interested in it. Like I want to check out new cards. I want to see how they fit and what they can do. And yeah, I'm not super interested in decks that have already, been around for a long time, if that makes sense. Yeah. Totally. What is an in-game moment that you've had while you were playing this deck that you just thought was really cool?
Ooh, okay. So I have this one, and it's the only time I've ever won on turn one with this deck.
Ooh.
I was playing just a pickup game with some friends at the RC in Denver. I'd kind of gone out as a special guest just to hang out there. I wasn't playing the RC. I was just hanging out with the top deck folks and kind of working their booth for the weekend, doing like content creator stuff, all that nonsense. But this is like 2 a.m. after hours. Have some friends there. We're in the hotel lobby, drinking, playing games, having a great time. And I was in second seat. My friend next to me, I believe the order is the person playing 1 is playing Ob Nixilis. I'm playing Etali. Player 3 is playing, I think, Oswald, the Tappy artifact commander. And then player 4 is on Atraxa.
Nice.
And 7 mana Atraxa, to be clear.
Yep.
And I play Etali turn 1 by doing a ritual into another ritual into cracking a Lion's Eye Diamond, so I don't even have a hand anymore. Just full sending it turn 1, seeing what happens. And I flip into these piles, and the first 2 flips, I don't remember what I got off of the Oswald. I think it was like a Mana Vault or something. It was like great mana. But the other 2 flips were 3 mana Teferi, which locks your opponents out of casting spells on your stuff, and ad nauseum from the Ob Nixilis player on turn 1. I proceed to dig through my library, hit an Underworld Breach and a Dual Caster Mage and all sort of the crazy stuff, and assemble an Ad Naus pile in a deck that does not play Ad Nauseam, but sure would if it could, And I was like, did I just win turn 1? They were like, yeah. And then the Oswald player shows me their hand, and they have a Rule of Law in their hand. They were like, yeah, you would not have gotten this possibility at literally any other time but turn 1 specifically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm here for. That's so cool.
I still think about that to this day.
Yeah. Oh my God, me too. I'm gonna be thinking about that. Yeah, and that's exactly it. I think it's just so satisfying to, it's great to put together the game plan that you've designed your whole deck around, but
right.
I feel like there's something extra special about still being able to win with a game plan from somebody else's deck that you've cobbled together. I just think that's so cool.
And the best part was too, everyone there was because it was at the friendly hours of the night, right? So everyone was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening!" And they were like helping me go through the line. It was awesome. Yeah, it was a great time, nice. and obviously great memories for everyone that was there for sure.
yeah, that's really cool. Nice, I love that. Okay, we've already made it to my final question for you, and that is if there is anybody out there who is interested in just interested in getting into cEDH, but also this deck in particular, what advice would you give to those people?
Yeah, so this deck's not easy, I will say. I'm throwing that out there. On the other hand, I've had several people who I know have picked up the deck since seeing me play it and have done really well with it. It's for such a silly deck, the numbers and the winning amount of people are actually doing on this deck is way higher than I ever thought. So I love that for this deck. Genuinely, the turn 2, if you can't cast Etali turn 2, you better have a really good reason why not. Is the way I tend to look at this deck. Everything that can copy Etali should copy Etali. If you can get some protection ahead of time, that's awesome. If not, just send it, see what happens. And there's definitely going to be games of cEDH that get a little chaotic when you throw that out there, but it's genuinely a deck that rewards pretty aggressive play, but also once again it is that non-deterministic storm. So if you're a person who new information is tough for you to adapt to and have that coming in, might not be the right deck, right? It's a deck that does require a lot of that ability to pivot and refocus and assess the board state almost constantly, right? And I feel good after years and years of playing Magic to meticulously be all right, so I have this mana floating, this thing, and now I'm going to copy this, hold priority, do this thing, right? And that is something that has taken a long time for me to to get to that point, right? But once again, I also know people who are jumping into cEDH after playing other formats for a while who are I'm crushing it with this awesome silly dinosaur. So it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. If you're someone like me who like loves mono red and you don't feel like you can get that energy from cEDH deck, you for sure can with this one. It's a great time. And then anyone getting into cEDH in general, it's a way more wide open format than you might think. If people don't understand the social dynamic of it, people, there's these common misconceptions about like being a variance heavy format and like how can you consistently like succeed at it. But there are folks like myself and many others who are doing it, and we're showing up and doing it pretty frequently. And there's a part of that that's amazing. It's in my opinion the most social format of Magic, right? And obviously Commander is in general, right? But there's a certain level of that makes the environment just better. In my opinion, from my experience, just enjoyable to be in a social environment, and that's a great part of the game. It comes with its upsides, comes with its downsides, but it's genuinely a blast. And you can play cEDH at a tournament, but I know many players who don't even ever show up for tournaments. They play cEDH casually, ironically.
Right.
But it's a great time, and it's been one of the most unique, most interesting expressions of Magic I've ever experienced. And I definitely did not go into playing cEDH to expect it to be my job, my career, like any of these things, right? But it captured me so wholly, and I was so fascinated by it that I ended up here. I always tell people who I coach, stoke that flame of curiosity, like follow it, and you're gonna gain so much from this format, genuinely. So
wow. Okay. Yeah, I am 10 out of 10 inspired right now. So yeah. Thank you so much. I think that's great advice. And one thing that I have noticed from cEDH players specifically is they have got to be the most respectful group of Magic players in existence. Like, never before have I seen a group of people so willing to like help each other and like collaborate on building decks, on checking out new cards. On things like that. And I really like to see that in the Magic community in general. And that's just a place where I always see that in cEDH. And I think that's something that's really special. That I agree. I think we should stoke those flames and make sure people carry on with that. So cool.
Absolutely.
Nice. Okay. I love that. Do you have any final comments or anything else you want to say, along with also plugging yourself and your socials and the other stuff you have going on?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned before, I'm full-time cEDH content creator, but also cEDH coach. I do that for a living. I coach people who are, on that tournament grind, but I also coach people who are, hoping to do the expedited version of how do I get into this format fast, help me pick a deck for me, all of that stuff. So people all over the spectrum of understanding. And it's something I truly love. I've had this month 2 of the the online tournaments were won by my clients, and I was like such a point of pride for me as a coach, and it's generally something I get really inspired by, and something I'm very proud to be doing for a living. So any of my socials, you can find me on there. If you reach out to me, my DMs are open for this very specific purpose. So that folks can come if they're interested in any of that. And you can find me on YouTube, ComedIan MTG. You can find me on the Mind Sculptors podcast, which is definitely a little bit more of our, it's got more of that podcast silliness energy on top of the fact that we do, numbers and all of that stuff and different podcast topics. And then, help out Scribe Babies and all that. So I'm all over the internet, ComedIanMTG@gmail.com if you want to find me, or at ComedIanMTG on Twitter, Comedian_MTG on Discord, all of my locations. So
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, and I'll have all of those links down in the episode description, so you can go check out Ian really easily. But anyway.
Thanks again for having me.
Oh, yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And kind of like I said, cEDH is a place where I've often, like, I've dabbled in it, and I've looked from afar, like, jealously, like I want to get into it. So I was really looking forward to chatting with you about it today. I think it's something that that I would love to spend more time and energy in. So this was perfect for me. Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you everybody for listening. I appreciate you so much for listening to this podcast. One last shout out to all of my patrons at the All That Glitters level, of which there is one. Jeff, thank you so much for being a patron. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening. I will catch you again on the next one.